for all of his enormous novels, for all of the prolixity of War and Peace, of Anna Karenina, and even some of the shorter works are pretty beefy. For all of that, there is nothing unessential in Tolstoy, and paying attention to the minor details is always an essential element of actually reading him, because you can glide by so much and not realize that you're missing the beefy part of the book. You're missing the whole point, and that's the point of Tolstoy. The death of Ivan Ilyich comes towards the end of his career. It's really the last significant fiction that he publishes. He also had, of course, a very extensive career as an essayist. And this is him after mulling the form of realist fiction for several years, several decades at this point. He's experimenting with the idea of realism itself, with the idea of fiction itself, and bumping up against its limits and having this conflict in what he can say and how he can say it. And this makes him really interesting at this point, because he's reaching a real inflection point for himself, a real crisis point. And the death of Ivan Ilyich, at the very beginning, tells you exactly how he wants you to read this. It's very easy to skim by, but if you just slow down, pump those brakes, he tells you exactly what you're supposed to be doing when you are going through this. He gives you the entire method of his aesthetics in the very beginning of this story. So let's just take a look at the very first paragraph. Beginnings and endings. Beginnings and endings. Beginnings and endings. Always look at beginnings and endings. And the very beginning of this story, the very first paragraph, has so much that you can unpack, and that gives you a hint as to where the story is going. During a break in the hearing of the Melvinsky case, the readers of the court and the prosecutor met in Ivan Yegorovich Shebek's room in the big law court building and began talking about the famous Krasovsky case. Fyodor Vasilievich became heated, contending that it didn't come under their jurisdiction. Ivan Yegorovich held his ground, while Peter Ivanovich, not having joined in the argument at the beginning, took no part in it and was looking through the Gazette, which had just been delivered. That's the first paragraph. And having read that, you can be excused for saying, eh? Now, if I were working as an editor or an agent or a publisher today, and somebody put this in front of me, I would read that first paragraph and throw it in the garbage. I would clog my toilet with this before I actually published it, because that is, on the surface, awful writing. That is terrible writing from a very specific perspective. Because who the hell are these people? What the hell are they talking about? The Melvinsky case. The very first sentence in the hearing of the Melvinsky case. I don't know about you. You guys are probably all smarter than I am. Maybe you guys are much better read in Russian jurisprudence of the mid to late 1800s, but I have no idea what the Melvinsky case is. And when I look down at the bottom of the page, there's no footnote telling me what the Melvinsky case is. And if I were to Google Melvinsky case, I'm guessing I would go down a very dead rabbit hole trying to find out what the Melvinsky case is. So why put it in the very first sentence? Why? The only reaction is confusion. Like, what What is that? I've never heard of that. I don't know what that is. You know, oh my God. Am I out of it? Am I not smart enough for this? You know, should I read the paper more? What's going on? And then he starts dropping all of these names. Now, forgiving the intricacies and confusions about Russian names, which are very difficult to keep up. In all of the better editions of long Russian novels, you usually get a list of names in the back of the book where they'll tell you, like, okay, this one character goes by all of these different names, and you just have to keep it straight. But here he's dropping all of these proper names in that very first paragraph. And I don't know who the hell these people are. I certainly don't know who Melvinsky is, but Ivan Yegorovich Shebek, Fyodor Vasilyevich, Pyotr Ivanovich, Igor Yegorovich, I don't know who these people are. I have no relation to them. And the automatic reaction is, well, should I know? Why don't I know? Oh my God, I don't know. Do other people know? Are other people smarter than I am? Why don't I know this? It alienates the reader. It alienates the people who are actually coming to this. And this is the very first impression. These are details that I don't know, and I feel bad about not knowing, and maybe I'm a little scared or embarrassed not to know. This is the normal reaction. If you're having that reaction, if you open this and just sort of like your eyes glazed over immediately, that's the point. That's the point. But you know, there's other stuff going on here that makes it really bad writing. There are a lot of passive verbs. In translation, you got all sorts of stuff going on that is complicated, and the Russian language is very, very different than the English language. So I don't want to lean too hard on this, but in just about every writing class you will ever take, you will be told that passive verbs are bad, active verbs are better. But here we're getting a lot of passive verbs, and at the very end also. The Gazette had just been delivered. Passive. There are all these instances of the verbs not really driving the story, not really driving what is happening, and they're very rarely actively doing anything. So that's interesting also. But then you look at some other elements here. You're told that things should happen. A plot is about things happening, right? A plot is usually a sequence of things happening. And the very beginning of this, the first few words are during a break in the hearing of the Melvinsky case. During a break, when, by definition, nothing happens. You're starting off with something that nothing is happening. You're starting off with something not happening, an absence, a void, not happening. In the hearing. A hearing is about hearing things. A hearing is not about doing things. A hearing is by nature passive. Again, in the Melvinsky case, and we talked about the Melvinsky case, the members of the court and the prosecutors met in Ivan Yegorovich Shebek's room. Meeting is active. They got together. These individuals came together in some form. Now, that's just an interesting contrast. They met. Human beings come together. Human beings are social animals, according to Aristotle. Human beings gather in groups. And you can look at that a couple of different ways. It is perhaps human nature to come together. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? Does coming together make them all a herd of non-individuals? Or is it their basic individual natures to come together? Is it an expression of one or the other? It's very uncertain at this point, but it's interesting that that is the first concrete action, positive action, active verb in this sentence. In Ivor Shebek's room, in the big law courts building, and began talking of the famous Krasovsky case. Okay, began talking. Lots of words. And what is all of this first sentence but a lot of words, a lot of talking, a lot of, quite frankly, blather that we don't know what the hell they're talking about. We don't know, as readers, what is going on. So it's just talk. It's just words. It's just empty words to us. And you get a sense that, well, if they began talking, they didn't begin doing anything, not necessarily active in that sense. Talking is active, I would say, but it's tangential to action. And the famous Krasovsky case, I love that, which almost doubles down on the Melvinsky case and says, oh, well, it's not just the Melvinsky case, it's the famous Krasovsky case. Everybody knows that, right? You know that. I know that. You know, why else use the word famous? Everybody should know it, but if I don't, does that make me dumb? I don't know. I feel, again, a little insecure, a little left out. I want to meet with them. And if I meet with them, I want to know all about these things. But if I don't know about these things, am I excluded? Am I left out of the community that they are forming? Fyodor Vasilyevich became heated. Also passive verb. Became heated. But also heated. Emotional. Raging almost. Heated. About what? We don't know. Doesn't make any sense to us. We have no interest in it. But just seeing that he is really into it is, okay. I don't know why, but he is. Contending that it didn't come under their jurisdiction. We don't know what it is yet, other than the case. But we don't know what the case is about, so we don't know why it matters, or why it may or may not come under their jurisdiction. So what he is arguing here also is that they should not act at all. They should be passive. Again, after being passive himself by becoming heated, he is now arguing that we should be passive by not acting on this case. We don't have jurisdiction, the right to speak in this case. Little things are starting to accrue, and you're starting to see patterns that suggest how you read this story. It didn't come under their jurisdiction. Also, passive voice. It didn't come under. Igor Yegorovich held his ground. Interesting term. Held his ground. Held his ground is a military term, essentially. And it is about not accepting, not giving up in a fight. Holding your ground. Okay, you're not surrendering. But does that have anything to do with the merits of the case? Or is he just going into this in a combative mode, in a militaristic, take no prisoners, aggressive mindset? Held his ground also. He's not saying that it has any merits in the case, but held his ground suggests that it might be a matter of ego for him. He's not going to give up his argument. He is always right. He. The fact that it is so centered on him. Igor Yegorovich held his ground. Ego-driven, perhaps. While Peter Ivanovich, not having joined the argument at the beginning, took no part in it. Took no part in it is, again, a kind of a passive moment. He is not engaging. But also that sets him outside the group. He's off to the side, just vaguely listening, but not so much. Having not joined the argument in the beginning, took no part in it, and was looking through the Gazette which had just been delivered. So he is singled out as this group as getting in a very heated, we're told, argument about something that we very detailed, but we have no idea what it is. If you've ever had to listen to, 3 or 4 lawyers in a room talking about something, my sympathies are right there because I want to reach for a gun and blow my brains out right there. But he is sitting off to the side. We are told that he is offset from the group. And he's not just offset from the group, he is offset from the group while reading. He's reading a newspaper, but he is in the act of reading. Who else at this moment is in the act of reading? Well, us. We are in the act of reading. We haven't taken a part in this argument. We don't really understand what the argument is about, and he might not either. Or maybe he does, but he just doesn't really care one way or the other. You get the sense he's just sort of bored and sifting through the newspaper, like one of us would be, sort of vaguely listening to somebody blather on in class or something, perhaps, while we're vaguely checking out our phone. But he's vaguely tuned in, sort of like listening, like, all right, they're talking. That's pretty much all he knows. It's just blather, but he's not really paying attention. But he is being singled out as a little different. So that signal tells us that, well, okay, he is different than the group. He is outside the group. And son of a gun, he is in the act of reading just like us. So we, in a way, are paired, twinned, if you will, with Peter Ivanovich. So in a story, and this is all we know about the story so far, in a story titled The Death of Ivan Ilyich, we are signaled that this guy is kind of a stand-in for the reader, Peter Ivanovich. I won't get into the meaning of Ivanovich as a name and its connection with Ivan Ilyich, but there is a kind of marshaling of the readers behind this one figure. He stands out. So in a way, we are being told that he is the main character. Whereas everybody else in this is a little bit confusing and hazy, we automatically enter into a relationship with this one character. But still, we can dig a little further into it. He's not necessarily reading. We are told he was looking through the Gazette. Looking through the Gazette. Okay, you can say, well, that's just kind of a weird locution, and again, it's a translation issue, perhaps, but looking through is not the same as reading. You can read something very deeply, and then you can look through it and just sort of get the gist, which is more or less what perhaps he is doing with the conversation on the other side of the room. He's getting the gist, but he's just not really paying attention. So in this act of reading, he's really just getting the gist. Well, if we have already been put into a relationship, a contrast, a linkage with Peter Ivanovich, are we also then reading or just looking through this reading matter, this story? Suddenly, we are starting to feel a little conspicuous again. Suddenly, that feeling of, well, I'm left out of that conversation about the famous about the Melvinsky case, but now am I being left out of this conversation between myself and the text? I'm being left out a lot here as a reader. And I'm not sure how to take that, because I don't necessarily want to be in on that very detailed technical discussion of the Melvinsky case. I'm not going to get it. And a lot of people seem to be yabbering about it very intently. And why? What does it really matter? But if you're attacking something that I'm doing, which is the act of reading, and you're causing me to think about, but am I really reading or am I just looking through this story? All of this is disturbing. All of this is shifting me around into some uncomfortable positions where, as a reader, I don't necessarily want to be. the entire first paragraph is a waste of time. Which is why I said that it's really not good writing. You are wasting, the text is wasting the reader's time. You are perhaps wasting your time by reading it. Because then you get to the very next line, its own paragraph, a nice clean shift into the action. Gentlemen, he said, Ivan Ilyich has died. Dun, 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 dun. And that's the beginning of the story. Because, well, the only thing we know about this story at this point is the title, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And right there, we have the character shout out, and also the primary action indicated in the title. He is dead. Ivan Ilyich has died. He has taken action. Notably, he has acted. You can argue whether or not that is a passive verb, and again, I'm not going to get into translation stuff, but he has done something, and it comes after this long, sort of meandering paragraph, not too long, but long enough to bore the bejesus out of all of us, and then you get that short little shift into action. Bam! Something happens. That's interesting. Now, from an editor's perspective, you might say, well, why not just begin with that? Just get rid of that whole first paragraph. It's terrible. You're boring people. You're turning them off. If you start with the action, then you can follow the action, and that's good plotting, damn it. That's good dramatic structure. Well, I think that contrast is the point. The contrast between dynamic and passive action. The overall hint of this comes in its boring quality. All of this stuff that is going on doesn't mean anything. And yet, we have been able to pick through it and find lots of meanings by going very, very slowly and thinking attentively about them. And maybe that's the point. The entire story will unroll before us and give us a great variety of stuff happening, of stuff being described. And you have to ask yourself, well, why am I looking at this? What is this? What is interesting about this? Nothing. But stopping to think about it is the point. Stopping to consider, well, what could that mean? Does that have any meaning? Is there any reason for that? What is this saying about me? That is the act of reading. That is the skill of reading. That is a skill of reading that is perhaps a little passive and flaccid in most people who don't read but rather look through what is on the page. Tolstoy is at this stage in his life, a proto-modern writer, a writer who expects a certain level of attention and discipline and rigor in the reading of him. You can't read him like you would read Charles Dickens, where everything just sort of unrolls and you're swept along, and it's a very passive act of reading. Here, no! You have to pay attention. You have to drill down. You have to say, well, why that? Why this word and not that word? Why this word and not that word? And why structure this paragraph up there before this other paragraph? What is the difference between a long paragraph and a short paragraph? What is the difference between not having an adjective and having 5 adjectives? What is all of this doing to me? As I'm reading through this, am I bored? Am I engaged? Am I thrilled? Am I being swept up? What is interesting to me, if anything? Am I actually intrigued by what the Melvinsky case is? Does it all just seem like wallpaper to me? He's asking you to ask these questions. He's not expecting an answer one way or the other. And you can be forgiven if you are a little bored and a little confused, or a lot bored and a lot confused. But then you have to ask why. Because he is trusting that you will ask why. He is trusting that you will get bored. You will get frustrated. You will go, what the hell is this? But the minute you do that, at that moment, you are actually reading and not just looking through the text. That's where you have to be with Tolstoy. That's where you have to be with every serious writer in order to take it seriously. And frankly, that is a lot more interesting than just passively looking through life. You think about things. You dwell on the meaning. You say, well, what could that be? What do I think about that? How do I feel about that? That's a lot more interesting than just passively going through a very dull, conventional, bourgeois life. He's telling us how to do it.